Everyone told me to pick my battles. So I picked the one that would either save my marriage or burn it to the ground. Either way, I wasn't leaving the table until they heard the truth. I'm Emily, 34, high school chemistry teacher, married to Mark for 4 years. We live in a cramped townhouse outside Dayton, Ohio, and I can make a mean boxed mac with 3 different cheeses. We were at his mother's house for Sunday dinner, the kind of weekly ritual that had once felt cozy and now felt staged. The dining room smelled like canned green beans and the faint sweetness of too much syrup on the pancakes his sister insisted on serving for dessert. It was loud in the way family gatherings always are. Too many voices orbiting one another, small announcements ricocheting until the real things get drowned out. Mark's dad told the same joke about his old truck. His sister waved her phone like a flag, eager for validation. His mother fussed over the centerpiece like it might unravel if she looked away. Mark sat to my left, the way he always did, palm touching the small of my back, an automatic reassurance I hadn't needed for a while. He smiled at me when our eyes met, and I felt that old reflexive safety until I remembered the screenshot. 2 nights earlier, I had been cradling my phone in bed, trying to fall asleep next to a man who had become excellent at half-truths. He'd fallen asleep first, breath warm against my shoulder, and curiosity had done the thing curiosity always does. It found a gap and slid inside. I opened his messages, no heroics, just a thumb unlocking a device I trusted to hold his face in every home screen photo. The thread I found wasn't with an ex, wasn't some petty argument. It was with someone who called him boss and sent him invoices. It was schedules and payments and the kind of language I didn't like. Deliver, drop, discrepancy. There were business names I didn't recognize and addresses that were cash-only locations. My chest tightened and my cheeks went warm with that particular slow burn. Betrayal mixed with the sick, cold clarification that comes when 2 stories about a person stop matching. I confronted him the morning after. Mark's face cast shadows, confusion, then irritation, then practiced innocence. "It's financial consulting," he said. "It's all above board, you don't have to worry about this." He told me to drop it. He told me I was making things worse. He told me I was imagining things. Gaslighting has a sound. It's a soft, consistent hum intended to drown out the things you remember seeing. I tried to let it be the hum. For 3 days, I watched him become the reasonable husband, picking up milk, clearing dishes, kissing my forehead with the half-smile of a man who thinks the truth is negotiable. But the messages, the receipts, the late-night GPS pings to neighborhoods that didn't match his consultations were not negotiable. His family treated Mark like a holiday miracle. Funny, generous, their boy who turned out all right. They'd saved his childhood baseball mitt. They pinned prom photos on the fridge like medals. They had no reason to doubt him. Why would they? Mark curated the version of himself that fit neatly into their lives. I could have kept the things I knew locked inside my head like contraband. I could have waited for him to change or for me to become numb. Instead, the opportunity came wrapped in silverware and small talk. His sister announced, to no one in particular, that they were finally going to do something about Grandma's estate. Transfer documents she claimed they'd been working on for months. It was awkwardly timed. Mark's tone went too light. I watched him as the conversation moved, watched the small flinches he tried to hide when talk turned to money and logistics. That was the moment the choice became sharp. If the family was moving or making plans that hinged on a man I now suspected of running dark deals, then every smile around that table would become a lie built on top of my silence. I thought about the people I loved and the people who loved him, not because they deserved to know, but because secrets are pests and they spread. I pictured his mother making plans for a condo renovation based on numbers she trusted Mark to bring. I pictured his sister leaning on a loan he promised to co-sign. The images were petty and practical and suddenly impossible to ignore. I rehearsed what I would say in the bathroom mirror while the house hummed with dishwashing and sitcom laughter. "I have information. I won't stand by. You deserve to know who your son really is." Each line tasted like an admission I wasn't ready to swallow. But the alternative, letting them continue under a false impression while I knew better, felt like a betrayal not just of them, but of myself. When the main course had been cleared and coffee cups began to multiply, Mark's father reached across the table and clapped Mark on the shoulder, beaming. His mother caught my eye and smiled in that proud, slightly indulgent way that mothers have when their children are politely entertaining house guests. Mark leaned in, ready to deliver a small anecdote about his week. The room drew in breath like an audience waiting for the next scene. I could feel every pulse in my neck. My heart moved like a fist, ready to strike or to protect. I wasn't naive. I knew what ripping open a lie in front of a family did to a room. It either clears the air or splinters it. I didn't know which would happen. I only knew I could no longer live in the gray of polite omissions. "Before Mark says anything," I said, standing up so the chair scraped and everyone looked. The scrape seemed louder than it was. "There is something I need to tell you." They looked at me like you look at a weather alert on the news, discomfort, then curiosity. Mark's face went blank for a second, then hard. His father's laugh tucked away. His mother murmured, "What is it, honey?" My mouth went dry. The words I'd practiced began to rearrange themselves into something sharper and truer than rehearsal. I swallowed and felt the room tilt, like a stage lighting changing before the reveal. "I found things on Mark's phone," I said, "and they don't line up with what he's told you about his work. I think he isn't the man you think he is." Mark's laugh snapped out of him like glass. Conversations stilled. A fork clattered somewhere to my right. His sister stared at me with her phone halfway to her chest, the social media autopilot momentarily broken. Mark stood up then, too, same time as me, face a shade I hadn't seen before. He took a step toward the end of the table where I stood, and I could hear his voice before the words. Low, controlled. The air between us felt like a drawn wire, electric and dangerous. "Emily," he said, like a man addressing a guest who'd made a scene at a restaurant. "Don't do this here." I could feel the room narrowing to that single snap of his voice. But I had already started. I had already committed to the arc of whatever this was going to become. I had already chosen to be the person who broke the illusion. His hand hovered at my elbow. I could either let him pull me back into the quiet I had been living in, apologies, smoothed conversations, tiny concessions that become a life, or I could let the whole thing fall apart and see what it looked like in the raw. I looked at his family. His mother with the tiny worry creases at her eyes, his father who had never once raised his voice, his sister with the neatly manicured nails tapping the table. I drew in a breath that sounded like an end and an invitation all at once. "You deserve to know," I said. My voice had the brittle calm of someone who has already decided to hurt, but refuses to be the one who keeps hurting in silence. Mark took another step forward. His expression hardened into something I recognized, the man who did damage and then explained it away. "Don't make this about me," he said. I could smell coffee and soap and the faint scent of his cologne. My hands were steady despite everything. The room leaned in. His mother reached toward him as if to shield him, or maybe to steady herself. I opened my mouth again to start telling them what I'd found, to pull the curtain back, to make them see the man I had seen in late-night texts and cash receipts. And then his sister cleared her throat, and the air shifted into a quiet that felt like a held breath. That quiet held us right up to the edge, and I could feel the next second arriving like a wave. I started to speak, and then his sister's phone buzzed, a tiny, indifferent chime like the world refusing to pause for my confession. She glanced down, thumbed the screen, and for a second the room exhaled with the relief of distraction. That second felt like betrayal. "Seriously," she said, face folding into amused confusion. "Mark, did you post that phishing photo without me?" Mark's laugh came out thin, automatic. He took another step toward me, lowering his voice like a negotiator. "Emily, you know how family is. Maybe you misunderstood." "Show them," I said, cutting the air between us with a single, deliberate sentence. "Just look. 2 nights ago I found texts, invoices, schedules. I have a screenshot." My hand moved before my brain finished deciding, and I held my phone up like evidence on a stage. The room tightened. Conversations frayed and then stopped. His father's eyes flicked from my face to the phone, as if hopping the screen would rewrite the moment into something kinder. Mark's mouth opened, closed, and opened again like a person rehearsing an escape route. "You're making a scene," he muttered. "This is private." "Then make it private by being honest," I said. "Tell them what deliveries are. Tell them why you're taking cash to places you call consultations. Tell them why the GPS shows hours in neighborhoods you never mentioned." I tried to keep my voice steady. What I couldn't keep steady were the small, furious tears that pricked the corners of my eyes, not from melodrama, but from the absurd, exhausted clarity of knowing. My phone reflected back tiny columns of text and addresses. I tapped to enlarge a picture, then another. They were ugly in the way truth can be, mundane details that, piled together, made a picture you couldn't unsee. There were invoices with company names I didn't know, shorthanded abbreviations, a line item labeled in a way that made my hands go cold. Mark's father leaned forward as if to read the screen. His mother reached for his hand like a reflex. "Baby, what?" she began. Mark moved faster than I expected. He reached and tried to take the phone from me, his fingers brushing mine. His touch had once been comfort. Now it felt like censorship. "Give me that," he said. "No." My refusal held more weight than I intended. It was a small rebellion that tasted enormous. He laughed again, but not the warm laugh I'd fallen in love with. This was a forced thing, brittle around the edges. "This is petty and invasive, Em. If you want to bring things up, take it outside. Don't drag my family into it." "Why not?" I asked. "Because it's easier for you to keep spinning. Because they'll keep believing the Mark you give them rather than the Mark I live with." The words spilled, and for the first time the quiet wasn't anticipation, it was attention. His sister finally put her phone down. "What exactly are we looking at?" she asked, genuinely curious. She was younger, 30 maybe, quick to assume drama was performative and not structural. But curiosity is a dangerous thing in a living room. I swiped to the conversation that had made my chest knot. Shorthand, directions, mention of a drop. I read it aloud, feeling absurdly exposed saying it. "I'll be there at 9. Cash ready. No questions. Boss will handle discrepancy." There was a beat where nobody breathed. Mark's face had drained. For a moment I thought he'd crumble, confess, apologize. Instead, he picked up a napkin and twisted it between his fingers like a man preparing to squirm out of a net. "Those are business clients," he said. "There are people who pay in cash. Some industries work that way. I do consulting for contractors, it's legit." "Contractors?" his mother echoed, eyes narrowing. "Mark, you never said." "I didn't want to make it boring," he said, and the attempt at humor landed like a stone. "It's not your business, Ma." He sounded irritated, and with that irritation came the familiar tactic, make the topic about the messenger. His father, who had been silent, made a small sound in his throat, uncertain. "Mark, if there's some misunderstanding." "There's not a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "There are patterns. Late nights, cash transfers, locations that don't fit, contractor consulting." His sister scoffed, a nervous laugh. "This is like a movie. Are you accusing him of what exactly?" I felt suddenly childish and stubborn, like a kid saying, "He's not the boy you think he is." But it wasn't childish. It was accumulation, small inconsistencies that, together, formed a thing that couldn't politely be ignored. "I don't know the label," I admitted. "I know what I saw on his phone. I know the receipts don't match what he told you about his job. I know he's been lying to me." Mark's expression went sharp then, anger replacing the defensive charm. He grabbed his chair and shoved it back, the legs scraping hard against the floor. Everyone recoiled a little at the suddenness. "You're lying," he snapped. "You're trying to make me look bad in front of my family. That's your gambit." "Is it, though?" I asked. "Or is it the only way to get people to listen? You've had months to be honest, and you chose secrets." He took a step toward me, and the room shrank around our two bodies. "If you keep this up, you'll ruin everything," he said. "You'll make my mom sick. You'll embarrass my dad." "I can't keep living a lie for their comfort," I shot back. "I won't, not when money and trust are involved." At that, his mother reached out in a way that looked like both protection and pleading. "Mark, son, please," she said softly. If there's something, we can handle it together. You always were good with numbers." Her trust was a physical thing, almost painful. I watched his eyes, looking like a man who'd been caught with his hand in a cookie jar and now was being judged for it. He changed tactics, smoothing the edges with practiced intimacy. Come on," he said, voice low, as if I could be convinced back into oblivion. "Don't do this. We're family. We'll talk about it later, please." Later, there it was, the word that had become his refuge. Later had been an island where truth went to die. Later meant the conversation never had to happen in the light of other people's eyes. Later meant I could be calmed into silence with promises of "we'll fix it" or "it's complicated." "Not later," I said. My voice was small and fierce. "Now, if this is about money and plans Grandma's making, now is the time." Mark laughed, a spiky sound that had no humor. "You're being dramatic. I'm asking you, please stop this." He tried again to take my phone. This time his hand closed around it, but I jerked it away. Our fingers grazed, and the contact sent a current of something awful through me. Shame, defiance, the finality of a boundary crossed. His sister rose too, eyes wild. "You're fighting over a phone," she said. "This is insane." "It's not about a phone," I said. "It's about lying. It's about putting people at risk because it's easier." "Risk?" his father asked, bewildered. What risk could there be from Mark's? Before he could finish, Mark's face twisted. He stepped forward with a speed that startled everyone and grabbed the back of my arm hard enough to bruise. "Enough," he hissed, right into my ear. "You're making me look like a criminal in front of my family." Pain flared across my forearm under his grip. The room recoiled. Someone gasped. His mother made a small sound like a choke. "Let go," I said, voice flat. Inside, an almost comic calm descended, as if the world had very suddenly become a set of facts to be observed. His hand loosened infinitesimally, then tightened again. "You don't get to touch me," I said. "You don't get to scare me into silence. Not here, not ever." His grip faltered, and then he let go with a small, exhausted exhale. He looked past me at his family, and in his face I read what he had planned. A spin, a story, an apology that would be small and quiet and blame me for making a fuss. The plan had wheels and gears and rehearsed lines. I knew his moves. I'd watched him make them in smaller skirmishes. But this room had witnesses now. His mother, his father, his sister, people who had only ever known the version of him he curated for family dinners. He opened his mouth to speak, to craft the version of truth that kept his dignity intact and my discomfort hidden. But at that moment, his sister's phone, the same little distraction that had saved him earlier, lit up again. Only this time she didn't look down to soothe it away. She frowned and then cleared her throat. "Guys," she said slowly, as if reading a message on the screen aloud to herself. "Someone just DM'd me this link. It's Mark, is this you?" Her voice trembled, real fear bleeding in. She tapped the screen, then turned the phone so the rest of us could see. The link preview showed images, an address, a logo, a Google Street View snapshot that matched one of the consultation locations I'd seen on his phone. I followed her finger to the preview, and my blood ran cold in a way that had nothing to do with melodrama and everything to do with the awful, clean certainty of being right. The room's center shifted, and for the first time that night, the air wasn't only charged by my accusation, but by a tangible piece of external confirmation appearing like a new witness in the room. Mark's face fell, not with shame but with calculation, fast, hungry. He started to talk, to spin, to reach for narratives that would keep the household intact. I watched him then, watching the people who had raised him, people who had saved his childhood mitt and trimmed his hair and believed in his directions. I watched the way he was trying to stitch his lies back together and realized that whether he succeeded would depend on more than his talent for charm. It would depend on whether his family wanted to believe him. The moment stretched, taut as a wire. I felt both terrified and strangely clear, like someone about to walk across a bridge that might or might not hold. The air in the dining room felt suddenly too small for all of us. Mark's fingers were still warm from where he'd grabbed my arm, and his sister's phone sat on the table like an accusation. For a breath, I thought the whole thing would unravel into a storm of denials and apologies. Mark spinning, me shrinking, family muddled in the middle. And then something quieter but harder happened. His mother leaned forward and asked him, very gently, to explain. He opened his mouth, and for a second I almost believed he would tell the truth. He had that look, the one I'd seen when he was about to charm a teacher out of a detention or smooth a landlord over a broken pipe. He started with the contractor story again, voice levering into that practiced warmth. But the DM preview on his sister's phone, the screenshot I'd held up, and the way his father's eyes had gone flat with confusion all worked together like a net. His sentences snagged. He tried to laugh it off. The laugh failed. "Why are there multiple addresses that aren't jobs?" his mother asked, voice that tiny tremor between worry and accusation. "Why cash, Mark? Why the secrecy?" He stuttered, then doubled down. "I told you I handle side work. It's nothing illegal. People pay cash sometimes. It's just complicated." "Complicated how?" his father demanded, leaning in a way that made the room smell like old cologne and the notion of responsibility. He looked at me then, as if I were a villain he'd failed to tame. "She's blowing this out of proportion," he said. "Maybe she doesn't understand freelance finances." "Maybe I do," I answered, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Or maybe I'm the only one who bothered to read the invoices. There are companies here you all know nothing about. One of them is connected to the address in that DM. I've got copies." I turned the phone so everyone could see the line items, the dates, the routes. I laid out the little architecture of his life, texts, invoices, GPS check-ins. It was ugly because it was ordinary. Numbers, locations, a pattern of choices. His sister's face had gone white. His father rubbed his forehead like someone confronting a complex math problem. Mark's face crumpled for a moment. No charm, no spin, just pure, clean panic. "This is private." He cried, "You're making me look like a criminal." "You made the choices in public," I said. "You chose to use those addresses and cash, knowing what they'd mean. You chose to lie." Silence opened. His mother covered her mouth, eyes wide, like someone who'd been shown a family portrait with a stranger in it. His sister looked at Mark like the foundation of her world had shifted. His father finally exhaled, and in a voice rougher than I'd ever heard from him, asked the simplest question. "Who are you doing this for, son?" That was the pivot. The look on Mark's face turned sharp and quick, rage and fear mixed into something brittle. He launched into a version of explanation that felt more like a dodge, nomming clients and claiming reputations I'd never heard of. At some point, his words started to collapse under the weight of evidence. An address mismatch, a Google preview, a bank transfer screenshot I'd found. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stood up so abruptly the chair legs scraped and his plate slid. He told everyone he needed air, that he'd step outside and call them later. He moved like a man performing an exit he'd already timed. I watched him go, and as the door shut behind him, the room revealed what it really was, an audience freed from the distraction of the lead actor. His mother sank back into her chair, hands folded over her chest as if protecting a beating heart. His sister's mouth trembled. She reached for her phone but didn't know who to call. His father sat as if the world had added a new, incomprehensible variable. "Mom," his sister said, the word almost a plea. What do we do?" For the first time since we'd sat down, the family looked at me less like an intruder and more like a witness. His mother, who had been ready to scold me a half hour earlier, looked at me now with something that complicated pride. Hurt, yes, but also gratitude for the truth in front of her. "Do you have more?" she asked quietly. I did. I had every small absurdity stacked like cards. Messages, receipts, GPS pings. I handed over copies, explained what each meant in language they could understand without my judgment bleeding through. We did not call the police. We did not file anything. Nobody dragged anyone into a courtroom because this was still, at that moment, a family matter, fraught and private and immediate. As we talked, layers peeled. His father, who'd always been the kind of man to defer to his boy's competence, began to ask clear, practical questions about money and transfers and grandma's estate, questions that made it real in a different way. His sister wept quietly and said she felt stupid for not noticing. His mother stroked the back of a hand, as if she were learning the contours of a new truth about someone she'd loved since infancy. I won't pretend it was noble or clean. There were tears and sharp words and the kind of defensiveness that feels like a reflex. There were accusations at me for ruining everything, cries that I'd been cruel. But there was also a slow, grinding reorientation. They started checking details, calling numbers I'd pointed to, asking their own questions. The disbelief softened into the meticulous kind of curiosity that leads to decisions. Mark came back after 15 minutes with a face like someone who'd been preparing a speech and found himself at a loss. He tried to walk back some of it, to cast it as normal freelance opacity. But the family had seen the scaffold of his life, and scaffolding is hard to hide once the tarp has been lifted. He yelled sharp, mean, and accused me of betrayal. I answered in the only honest voice I had left. "I tried to talk to you privately," I said. "I asked for honesty. You refused. I couldn't let them." I gestured at the people around the table. Build plans on secrets. We argued until the coffee went cold. At one point he stood, picked up his jacket, and left, slamming the screen door with a slam that felt like a punctuation mark. No one followed. The house hummed with the aftermath of the sound. After he left, his mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "Thank you for telling us," she said, voice small. "We would have been God. We could have made some horrible mistakes." Her gratitude wasn't a complete absolution. It didn't make things simple, but it made the room hold a different shape, one that made room for consequences. They needed time to process. I needed to breathe. I left their house that night with a sweater I'd grabbed on the way out and an odd lightness folded into my chest. The decision to reveal had been terrifying and decisive and real. I hadn't known if I'd saved anything or destroyed everything. I only knew I could no longer live with the fog of lies. In the weeks that followed, we did what adults do when foundations shift. We paused plans, we froze joint accounts, we made calls. Mark called, begged, explained, sometimes with fury, sometimes with promises, sometimes not at all. His family sorted their loyalty the way people sort heirlooms. Some boxes to keep, some to open carefully, and some to send away. I found myself answering questions I hadn't expected to face. About trust, about boundaries, about what it means to stand up for truth even when it hurts people you love. I lost some people. I gained a kind of clarity I could not have predicted. Was I right to expose him in front of his family, or should I have kept pressing privately until we reached a different outcome? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently?